soul? Ancient wanderer, are you still sleeping beneath the sands of my unconscious? I whisper your name, not with my voice, but with my breath. I descend not to escape the world, but to remember it anew from within. There are moments in life quiet and unspectacular when the weight of existence shifts imperceptibly, and something old within us stirs. A dream unsettles us. A memory, long buried, floats to the surface with uncanny vividness. A face in the crowd evokes a forgotten myth. We are not ill. We are being summoned. This subtle dislocation is not mere chance. In the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung, it is the soul's way of calling us inward. The ego, which has charted its maps upon the terrain of the visible world, finds itself unprepared for this voyage. And so it hesitates at the edge of the known while the unconscious waits like an ancient sea. Jung called this return to the depths the confrontation with the unconscious. But unlike the descent into madness, this descent is sacred. It is not a collapse, but a pilgrimage, a journey through the imaginal landscape where the soul speaks in symbols, visions, and voices not our own. Here, in the dim light of the psyche, begins the great inner experiment, active imagination. Active imagination, Jung wrote, is the method by which the images of the unconscious are given voice. It is not daydreaming. It is not fantasy. It is a dialogue with the unknown parts of the soul. Unlike dreaming, where consciousness slumbers, active imagination is an awakening within. You remain present. You do not dissolve into the image, you walk within it. You question it. You speak with its inhabitants. You are both the seeker and the witness, both the dreamer and the scribe. And like all great inner techniques, active imagination is not Jung's invention. It is a modern articulation of something as ancient as the soul itself. Hermetic echoes, as above, within. Long before psychology bore the name, the sages of old knew that the human being was a mirror of the cosmos. The emerald tablet, the cornerstone of Hermetic wisdom, opens with the words, "That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below." But the Hermetic teaching does not stop at symmetry. It implies a kind of interactivity. What lies above in the heavens, in spirit, in the divine mind, communicates with what lies below in matter, in human form, in psyche. The bridge is the imagination. For the Hermeticist, imagination is not fantasy. It is a subtle organ of perception, a third eye through which the invisible becomes visible. The Stoics would say that the logos, the rational fire that orders the universe, lives in the soul of each human, and that by tuning ourselves inward, we hear its resonance. What Jung calls the collective unconscious. Hermes Trismegistus would have named the anima mundi the soul of the world. The archetypes that Jung cataloged the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, the hero are, in Hermetic terms, gods made immanent not in temples, but within the chambers of our own psyche. And so, when we engage in active imagination, we are not indulging in private hallucination. We are stepping into a temple older than any stone, a temple made of dreams, memories, instincts, and myths, all gods reside within us, said Plotinus, echoing the Delphic maxim, to remember them, we must descend. The descent begins. Jung's Red Book and the Ritual of Return. In December of 1913, Jung sat at his desk and let go. He had begun having visions of blood, of floods, of strange figures emerging from caves. The world around him seemed stable, but within, a war had already begun. As he later wrote, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, I had to abandon the certainties of science and reason and venture into the unknown. Jung called it his most dangerous experiment, and yet he was never lost. He maintained his family, his lectures, his practice. This was not psychosis. This was a conscious descent into the unconscious, a sacred act of remembrance. Out of this came the Red Book, Jung's illuminated gospel of inner visions, painted in medieval calligraphy and bursting with numinous symbols. He spoke with Philemon, his inner sage, Salome, the blind feminine, and encountered mythic beings that seemed to possess wisdom beyond any academic text. To the superficial observer, he wrote, "It will appear like madness, but it is not. It is the soul, speaking in its native tongue." Jung did not simply receive these images, he engaged them. He walked among them. He argued, submitted, resisted. He let them speak freely, not because they were always right, but because they were real. The psyche, to Jung, was not a metaphor, it was a terrain. And this, precisely, is the essence of active imagination. It is not fiction. It is not guided visualization. It is not wishful thinking. It is a confrontation with autonomous psychic realities that dwell within the deep, the sacred middle ground. Not fantasy, not reason-active imagination. Then is neither daydream nor logic. It is the meeting point, a hermetic threshold between the conscious and the unconscious, the ego and the archetype, the known and the mysterious. Imagine a waterfall, Jung said, cascading from the heights of the unconscious to the basin of awareness. Your task is not to climb the waterfall or divert it, but to meet it, to stand beneath its current and let its symbols wash over you. This is where dreams end and dialogue begins. Unlike dreams, where the ego is passive, in active imagination, the ego participates. You do not merely witness your inner world, you enter it. You ask questions. You are challenged. You may be seduced or attacked. You may walk with Hermes, wrestle with a lion, headed God, or sit by a fire listening to a faceless stranger who speaks in riddles. But this interaction is not chaotic. It follows a deeper law, the law of individuation. Just as alchemists sought to unify sulfur and mercury, to marry sun and moon, to transmute lead into gold, so the psyche seeks wholeness, and the dialogues of active imagination are the furnace of that alchemy. You must descend with the torch of consciousness into the labyrinth of your own soul, not to slay the Minotaur, but to understand why you built the maze. If active imagination is a dialogue, then who exactly is speaking from the depths? This is the next mystery one must encounter, because the moment you step into the imaginal world, not with idle fantasy, but with reverent attention, you are met with others. Not external people, and not mere projections of your waking ego. These are archetypal figures, entities with their own voice, will, and psychic gravity. Jung realized this early in his descent. As he dialogued with Philemon, his inner sage, an old man with the wings of a kingfisher, he found that Philemon often expressed ideas that contradicted his own conscious thoughts. And yet, these ideas possessed an undeniable wisdom, as though Jung were the student, and this being his teacher. This was the first great realization. The figures in our inner world are autonomous. You do not invent them, you encounter them. I saw that Philemon was a force, not myself. Jung wrote, "He said things I had not consciously thought. He was a living personality within me. These are not metaphors. They are psychological realities with the intensity of myth. They correspond to what the Hermetic philosophers called the daemon's intermediary spirits, between the human and the divine. Invisible presences that guide, test, inspire, or deceive. In modern language, they are archetypes, universal patterns, and energies that inhabit the collective unconscious, surfacing in every age, every myth, every culture. They appear in dreams as the stranger, the warrior, the wounded child, the divine mother, the dark twin. They appear in stories as Isis and Osiris, Prometheus, the Virgin Mary, the Fool of the Tarot. They live in art, in religion, in the deep recesses of our inner cosmology. And when they rise during active imagination, they do not ask for obedience, they demand recognition. The alchemical fire, individuation as inner union. In Hermetic alchemy, the work of transformation, the magnum opus proceeds through 4 stages. 1. Nigredo, blackening, decomposition, the dissolution of the ego. 2. Albedo, whitening, purification, awakening of the inner light. 3. Citrinitas, yellowing, the dawning of solar consciousness. 4. Rubedo, reddening, the union of opposites, the birth of the self. Jung saw in this ancient schema a mirror of psychic growth, active imagination. He believed was one of the soul's deepest tools for moving through these stages not symbolically, but experientially. In Nigredo, the images that arise may be terrifying: blood, death, chaos. Jung himself saw oceans of blood and corpses before World War erupted a prophetic storm, not only in Europe, but within his soul. The unconscious, when approached honestly, often begins in shadow. It confronts the ego with what it most fears or rejects. But through dialogue, reflection, and surrender, these images shift. They begin to reveal their hidden structure, the albedo. A woman may find the great mother who nourishes her lost intuition. A man may encounter the wounded boy who has been trapped in silence for decades. This is the whitening of the soul, the softening of inner fragmentation, the cleansing of illusion. Then comes Citrinitase, the stage of gold, light dawning within. A new awareness emerges. The inner dialogue becomes more coherent. Archetypes begin to reveal their purpose. Wisdom flows. The ego is no longer center stage. The self begins to crystallize. And finally, Rubedo, the sacred marriage, sun and moon united, spirit and matter reconciled, conscious and unconscious joined in a new vision of wholeness. Active imagination is the furnace of this transformation. It is where the prima materia, the raw psychic material, is cooked, reshaped, and made luminous. But this work is not metaphorical. It is real. It involves struggle, resistance, desire, fear, and above all, dialogue. Dialogue as sacred encounter. When the ego meets the archetype. To illustrate the process, consider the example of Robert A. Johnson, the Jungian analyst who made active imagination accessible to Western readers. In Inner Work, he recounts the story of a woman obsessed with repainting her house. The surface problem was about choosing colors, but beneath it was a deeper psychic crisis, one of artistic starvation. During her active imagination, she met an inner figure named J.A., a Japanese androgynous artist who felt imprisoned by a culture that made no room for beauty, slowness, or emotional nuance. J.A., I am afraid I will be locked up again. In my life, there have been few outlets for you. I hardly knew you existed. This exchange is not therapy, it is alchemy. A suppressed archetype, perhaps the animus in its creative form, was finally heard. The woman began spending time in nature, in clay, in stillness. She nourished that inner figure, and in turn, her own life regained color, grace, and dimension. She didn't imagine a solution. She entered a living relationship with an aspect of herself that had waited in silence for decades. This is the mystical realism of active imagination. You are not merely analyzing yourself. You are being analyzed by the parts of yourself that remember your true nature. As Hermes Trismegistus once declared, that which listens in thee is not the flesh nor bone, but the divine spark. To listen, you must descend. You must not control the image. You must not turn it into a performance. You must meet it as you would a stranger in a dream alert, humble, open. And when you do, you begin to hear the music of your own myth, the caution, possession versus participation. But as Jung repeatedly warned, this journey is not without danger. The unconscious is vast. It is not nice. It is not safe. It is primordial. It contains gods and beasts, angels and tyrants, fragments of ancestral memory, and impulses we have never dared to name. And if the ego surrenders too easily, if the boundaries are not well defined, a person can become possessed by an archetype. They may begin to think they are the prophet, the seductress, the wounded healer, the divine child. They mistake inner truth for outer identity. This is inflation, a spiritual pride that leads to collapse. Active imagination must therefore be practiced with the firm grounding of the ego, in the container of ethical discernment. and preferably, at least in the beginning, with the guidance of a therapist, spiritual director, or trusted elder in Hermetic terms. The mage must know when to invoke and when to withdraw. The serpent coiled at the base of the spine is both healer and destroyer. The logos must lead. Do not forget, Jung wrote, that the unconscious always reflects the face we turn toward it. Hostility lends it a threatening aspect. Friendliness softens its features. Let your soul speak in its own language. Do not dress it in the clothes of logic. Do not shame it into silence. Let it emerge, raw and luminous, as the oracle within. The unconscious does not speak in arguments. It speaks in images. Its voice is neither linear nor literal. It arrives in colors, textures, forgotten faces, ruined temples, celestial fire. Its syntax is myth. Its grammar is dream. And its messages are often cloaked in the very things the ego would rather ignore. To enter into active imagination, therefore, is to enter a language game of a different order. One where the rules are felt, not formulated. One where meaning emerges not from control, but from communion. But this mystical interaction between ego and unconscious must be anchored. Without form, the imagination can become a flood. Without structure, the inner dialogue collapses into passive fantasy or inflation. Thus begins the sacred mechanics of the practice, the how of meeting the unconscious, ethically and effectively. I, the act of recording, anchoring the invisible. The first rule of active imagination is deceptively simple. You must record what happens. Whether by writing, typing, or speaking aloud into a recorder, the experience must be captured. Why? Because without a tether to the material world, the images vanish like vapor. They elude memory, distort with ego interference, or dissolve into a vague, emotional afterglow. Recording is not about performance. You are not writing for publication. You are etching a living encounter into form, just as Jung painted and scripted his red book, giving flesh and bone to the psyche's voice. The alterations must be carefully noted down. Jung insisted, for they reflect the psychic processes in the unconscious background, which appear in the form of images composed of conscious memory material. How you record is up to you. Use initials, E for ego, JA for the inner figure. Use lowercase for your voice, caps for theirs. Or speak both parts aloud, then transcribe. Let the experience flow without judgment. Let it be strange. Let it be chaotic. Let it be unfinished. There is a sacred trust in capturing the message of your inner world, just as scribes once recorded oracles or prophecies on clay tablets. In Hermeticism, writing is an act of manifestation. What is spoken becomes, what is named is born. So too, your recording becomes the ritual text of your own inner temple. 2. The ethics of inner dialogue, boundaries, discernment, and responsibility. But be warned, not all who speak in the inner world are to be obeyed. The archetypes are real, but not all are benevolent. Some deceive, some dominate. Some come, in the guise of wisdom, but seek to colonize the ego with false power. This is where the second foundation of active imagination must be built: ethics. Jung insisted that the ego, though small, compared to the unconscious, must retain its moral compass. It must not surrender blindly to inner figures, no matter how seductive or wise they appear. You may meet an old man in your imagination who offers profound insights, but if he demands your keys and purse, your resources and autonomy, something is wrong. The creatures of the unconscious, Robert Johnson warns, are personifications of the impersonal forces of nature. They do not possess a superego. You must be the one to bring ethics into the inner world. This is the difference between participation and possession. Participation means dialogue, mutual transformation, listening and speaking, being affected, but not consumed. Possession means the ego loses center. It identifies with an archetype or becomes overwhelmed by its energy. This leads to inflation, obsession, or psychic fragmentation. The way forward is discernment. Ask the inner figure, who are you? What do you want? Why are you here now? Do you serve the self or something else? And always remember, you have the right to say no. In Hermetic tradition, the mage must test the spirits. So too, the inner seeker must question all that appears, not from fear, but from a deep reverence for truth. 3. The importance of the setting. Sacred space for inner work. The third practical principle of active imagination is the creation of sacred space. The unconscious does not respond well to distraction. You cannot meet your inner gods in the middle of your email inbox. You must create time and place, a ritual space that signals to the psyche, now, I am listening. Find a room, close the door, dim the lights, light a candle or burn incense if it helps. Make it yours. Tell those you live with that you are not to be disturbed except for a fire or the apocalypse. This is not vanity, it is necessity. You are about to walk into the inner sanctum of your own being. Silence your phone. Still your body. Close your eyes. Or begin walking. If that's how your inner figures appear, Robert Johnson described the seashore as his sacred place. When uncertain, he would imagine walking its sands until someone appeared. For others, it may be a forest glade, an ancient ruin, a library of glowing books. Find your symbolic threshold, your imaginal place of encounter. And when you are there, let go. Begin. Wait. Dialogue. Not performance. The art of listening. The moment something appears, a face, a phrase, a color, hold it. Do not jump from image to image like flipping channels. Stay. Focus. Ask, who are you? What do you want me to know? What am I afraid to see? Let the image evolve. Let the figure speak, and do not control the outcome. You are not writing a novel. You are midwifing emergence. The imagination has its own rhythm. It will reveal what is ready, nothing more. If a feeling arises, rage, sorrow, shame, welcome it. Speak to it. Ask for its face. Ask for its form. Sometimes you will hear only silence. That too is something. Wait. Return tomorrow. Sometimes the image will flee. That too is an answer. Active imagination is not a one-night ritual. It is a relationship built over weeks, months, years. It is inner intimacy with the unknown lover, the forgotten twin, the hidden oracle inside. V, the ritual of return, bringing the imaginal into the physical. But the work is not done when the dialogue ends. You must return. You must incarnate what was learned. This is the final step, and perhaps the most crucial. In ancient Hermetic rites, the initiate would leave the inner chamber and perform an act, pouring libation, lighting a torch, painting a glyph, not to explain the vision, but to honor it. So too, in active imagination, you must perform a ritual, not grand, not theatrical, but personal. Walk barefoot in nature. Light a candle and sit in silence. Draw the figure you met. Mold it in clay. Place a stone on your altar. Whisper a name you were given. Let your body know the work happened. Let your hands remember. Let your senses become witnesses to your soul's journey. The unconscious does not care for analysis. It wants relationship. It wants to see you act, not to please it, but to integrate it. Only then is the transformation real. There is a bridge between the worlds, a trembling, golden thread. Dreams lead us to its threshold. Active imagination helps us walk across. To dream is to receive messages. To imagine actively is to respond. The unconscious speaks to all of us in sleep. Its images rise unbidden, enigmatic, unsettling, divine. The dream is the first knock on the door, but most of us wake and forget. Or we analyze, dissect, or dismiss. Jung's revolutionary insight was not merely that dreams are meaningful, it was that they could be continued, not just interpreted like riddles, but entered, expanded, dialogued with, brought to life. This is where active imagination becomes not only a tool, but a ritual of continuity, a bridge between unconscious and conscious, between sleep and wakefulness, between dream and embodiment. Extending the dream, carrying the myth forward. Imagine this. You awaken from a dream in which you are standing before a locked gate. You reach for the key, but just as your hand touches it, you wake up. Most would stop there. Wonder what the gate meant. Ponder the symbolism. Write it down and forget. But in active imagination, this is not the end. It is the invitation. You return to the image consciously now. Sit in silence. Breathe. Recall the dream. See the gate again. Now, extend. Let the image resume. What happens next? Do you turn the key? Who or what is on the other side? Do you hear footsteps approaching? What are you feeling? Fear? Longing? Let the imagination unfold it further. Jung believed this process, the dream extension, was the most natural entry point into active imagination. The dream offers the archetypal seed. Imagination helps it grow into a tree. In Hermetic thought, dreams were not mere fictions. They were the soul's nocturnal journeys, real voyages into the realms of the subtle body. The Egyptians had books of the dead to guide these journeys. The Gnostics had maps of the eons. The alchemists had their visions of the green lion and the red king. Dreams, they believed, were partially lived myths, glimpses of our soul's work in progress. Active imagination takes those glimpses and invites us to finish the story. 2. The transcendent function, where ego meets the archetype. But what happens when you truly meet the inner figure in imagination, not just as a projection or memory, but as an independent presence? That is when the deeper work begins. Jung called this encounter the activation of the transcendent function. It is not a function in the mechanical sense, but a psychic alchemy, a third thing that arises when ego and unconscious meet with full intensity. The transcendent function is not the ego's answer, nor is it the unconscious's dominance. It is a creative synthesis, a new position that did not exist before. The transcendent function arises, Jung wrote, when conscious and unconscious contents are brought together. Out of the union of opposites emerges a new attitude, a new possibility. This is not compromise. It is not resolution through logic. It is transformation through encounter. And it often comes through the shock of contradiction. An inner figure might appear and say, "You have spent your life trying to be strong, but I am your weakness, and I have something to teach you. You may resist, argue, reject, but if you stay, if you listen, if you feel something new is born, not surrender, not domination, but integration." This is the fruit of active imagination, not insight, but change. The kind of change that can't be faked, the kind that slowly shifts your speech, your posture, your priorities, your very tone of life. 3. The self as synthesis, the archetype of wholeness. If the ego is the I of waking life, then the self with a capital S is the center of the whole psyche, both conscious and unconscious. It is the totality. The self is not an idea. It is an experience. When the transcendent function is activated and opposites begin to converge, not cancel something, third is born. This is what Jung saw in his Red Book. Not just insight, but a reorientation of identity. You are no longer the isolated ego. You are the carrier of a myth. I am not what happened to me. Jung wrote, I am what I choose to become. The self appears in dreams as mandalas, wise elders, children crowned in light, sacred marriages, inner temples, divine beings with two faces. It is symbolized in Hermeticism as the rebus, the union of king and queen, sun and moon, spirit and matter in a single being. This is the mystery of individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole, living both the angel and the animal, the warrior and the poet, the fool and the sage. Active imagination is the ritual chamber where this individuation is rehearsed and embodied. You meet the rejected parts, You befriend the inner villain. You forgive the child. You stand before your daimon and say, "Teach me." And then the ego steps aside, not to disappear, but to serve the deeper self. This is not a one-time event. It is the ongoing work of the soul. In alchemical terms, the rubedo, the final reddening, is not the end. It is the beginning of conscious life lived in service to the inner fire. 4. Signs of integration. From vision to embodiment. How do you know when the transcendent function is at work? You begin to experience a new coherence, a subtle alignment in your daily life. A long-standing inner conflict suddenly makes sense from a higher perspective. A chronic behavior or addiction begins to lose its grip not by force, but by insight. You feel more centered, not because you've solved everything, but because you are inhabiting yourself more fully. Synchronicities appear, outer events that echo inner dialogues. A dream that once terrified you now returns in peace. These are signs that the dialogue with the unconscious is bearing fruit. The self does not shout. It resonates. And when it speaks, it calls you not to transcend the world, but to walk in it with soul. As Hermes teaches in the Corpus Hermeticum, the true initiate is not he who flees the world, but he who sees God in all things. To touch the soul is to step into myth not as story, but as reality veiled in symbol. The gods are not dead. They have gone inward, and they wait. Beneath the surface of daily life, beyond our names, routines, ambitions, and inner chatter flows an ancient, invisible river. Its current carries voices older than language, the gods of old, the spirits of ancestors, the archetypes we've forgotten how to name. This river doesn't speak in facts. It speaks in symbols, stories, and dreams. And those stories are not fiction. They are our inheritance. To step into this mythic river is not to escape reality, but to rediscover it. Active imagination, at its highest form, is not a psychological technique. It is a return to myth, not as legend, but as lived inner experience. It is to realize that the inner figures who speak in dreams and visions are not hallucinations or inventions. They are archetypes. They are the eternal forms, psychic energies that have moved through every culture, every age, every soul. Jung knew this intimately. The strange old man who appeared in his visions, whom he called Philemon, was not a literary character. He was a guide in inner Hermes. The blind woman, Salome, who danced in his imagination, was not merely fantasy. She was the lost feminine, the anima, suppressed by centuries of intellectual dominance. These beings carried a force that exceeded Jung's conscious understanding. They were autonomous, alive. In ancient times, these forces were known as gods, not the gods of dogma, but of symbol, not beings to be worshipped blindly, but encountered in awe. The warrior god was Ares. The wounded healer was Chiron. The trickster wore many masks: Hermes, Loki, Raven, Coyote. The great mother was Isis, Demeter, Kali, and the Virgin. These names vary, but their essence is constant. They are the inner patterns of human becoming. when they rise in active imagination, they demand not obedience but dialogue. They seek recognition. They test the ego, press it, stretch it, contradict it, and in doing so, they initiate it into a deeper mystery. You are not just one self. You are many. You are myth incarnate. But how do we know whether we are truly engaging with the archetypes or simply playing with our fantasies? This is a critical question. The answer lies in presence. When we daydream, we are passive. We drift, disconnected. We script the scene, control the story, chase pleasure or distraction. The ego is in full command and nothing of substance changes. But in active imagination, something shifts. You are no longer the author. You are a participant. The figures speak back. They surprise you. They resist your expectations. You feel as if you are not imagining something new, but discovering something ancient. You may find yourself standing at the mouth of a cave, and instead of deciding what happens next, you simply wait. A figure approaches. You speak. It answers with words you did not write. You feel a stirring in the chest, a knowing beyond logic. That is when you know. The encounter is real, psychologically real, spiritually true, and the experience deepens. Sometimes you are not just in dialogue, you are in adventure. You are walking through a myth that your soul has written long before your birth. The unconscious does not always appear in isolated figures. Sometimes it builds entire worlds, a flooded city, a temple where the walls breathe, a dark forest where animals speak in riddles. These are not stories for entertainment. These are initiations. You may be asked to heal a wounded creature who then transforms into your brother, or to sit at the feet of a queen who whispers truths that undo you. You may have to pass through fire, drown in an ocean, dig up a buried child, and all of this. You feel in your body the fear, the awe, the ache of it. This is not drama. This is transformation. The ancient philosophers understood this. The Hermetic texts speak of the ascent of the soul through heavenly spheres, each guarded by archetypal intelligences. The Gnostics mapped the same terrain in their sacred stories, where the soul must confront the archons, inner and outer powers, before returning to the pleroma, the fullness of being. Jung called this the mythopoetic imagination, the innate human ability to create symbolic narratives that mirror and resolve inner conflicts. He believed each person lives a myth, even if they don't know what myth it is. The work of active imagination is to uncover that myth and to live it consciously. But beware, the archetypes are not safe. They are holy. They are flames, not candles. To approach them casually is to risk being burned. Jung himself warned that the unconscious, when not approached with humility, can overwhelm the ego. You must be anchored, ethical, disciplined. The inner world is not Disneyland. It is a temple and a wilderness. Both. You may meet the trickster who flatters you, only to lead you into self-deception, or the wise old man who tempts you to abandon the world and live in abstraction. Not all that glitters in the inner realm is gold. Some of it is the fool's mirror. This is why discernment is essential. You must ask each inner figure, what do you serve? If the answer is vague, grandiose, or seductive, be cautious. If the figure demands submission without question, retreat. True archetypes will challenge you, but they will also respect your right to question them. And when the dialogue is real, when it is held in ethical tension, something stirs in the deep, a remembering, a stirring of ancient resonance. You begin to feel connected to stories you've never heard, as if you were remembering rather than learning. You weep at myths. You recognize yourself in characters from distant lands and times. You begin to sense that you are not merely a personality born in one country, but a node in a vast, archetypal field of being. This is what it means to awaken the primordial soul, the part of you that was never only personal, the part that remembers, that belongs, that speaks in the thunder of old gods and the whisper of forgotten dreams. You are not just healing your wounds. You are awakening a lineage. You are reclaiming a sacred inheritance. And that inheritance demands embodiment. In the final part, we will explore how to integrate this imaginal work into daily life, how to ritualize it, how to honor it with your hands, your breath, your choices. For the soul does not awaken merely to be seen. It awakens to be lived. Do not leave the temple the same way you entered. If you have seen the face of your soul, then let your body remember. Let your hands carry the vision. Let your life become the altar. There is a moment, after the vision, after the dialogue, after the descent, when the silence returns, the figures fade, the images dissolve. The scene collapses like mist at sunrise, and you are left alone, back in the room, back in your chair. The ordinary world rushes in the ticking clock, the dishes in the sink, the cold floor beneath your feet. But something is different. You have seen something, heard something, felt something, and that something, if not anchored, can vanish like a dream forgotten by noon. Worse, it can become dangerous, inflating the ego, distorting behavior, pulling you into delusion or detachment. That is why every true act of active imagination must be followed by a final phase, the ritual of return. This is not a metaphor. It is a sacred act, a bridge between worlds. It is how the inner becomes outer, the invisible becomes tangible, the myth becomes lived, the sacred necessity of ritual. Jung understood this well. That is why he poured hours into the Red Book, not simply writing, but painting, illuminating, recording the dialogues in calligraphic devotion. This was not art for art's sake. It was ritual in action. To ritualize your active imagination is to complete the circuit. Otherwise, you risk dissociating from the experience, treating it like entertainment, or worse, losing its transformative potential. In ancient Hermetic practice, no vision was considered valid until it had been ritually grounded. The initiate was required to act, to leave an offering, to speak a word, to walk in a new way, because only then did the vision become real, not just in mind, but in matter. This principle is timeless. Without incarnation, there is no transformation. 2. Small acts, deep resonance. Rituals need not be elaborate. You do not need candles, robes, or sacred tools, though you may use them. If your soul resonates, the best rituals are simple, personal, and embodied. Here are some examples. If you spoke with a sorrowful inner figure, write them a letter and burn it as a release. If you walk through a burning landscape in your vision, stand beneath water and feel the contrast. If a forgotten child emerged from the dark, place a small toy or stone on your altar to honor them. If you felt called by a goddess of wildness, go barefoot through nature and say her name aloud. If you were shown a symbol, draw it, even crudely, and carry it in your pocket. The power of ritual is not in spectacle, it is in presence. Your soul will recognize the sincerity of your gesture, however small. Remember, the unconscious does not speak in explanations. It speaks in actions. 3. Embodiment. The final integration. Ritual is the first step, but the deeper challenge and the truest test is embodiment. To embody the insight means to let it shape your choices, your relationships, your presence. It means becoming a little more aligned with your inner myth, a little more loyal to your soul. This can look like speaking a truth you once feared to say, creating space in your life for silence, reflection, and beauty, choosing to nurture the abandoned parts of yourself you met in vision, changing your posture, your walk, your breath, as though you now carry something sacred inside, saying no to what fractures your energy, and yes to what feeds your integrity. This is where the vision enters the bloodstream. This is where psychology becomes sacrament. It is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle, slow, and silent. But the inner world watches. And when you act from your depths, the archetypes rejoice, not because you pleased them, but because you remembered yourself. You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, Jung wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. And once it is conscious, once the shadow has spoken, the child has wept, the diamond has whispered, you are not the same. You may return to your job, your marriage, your morning coffee. But something inside will be rearranged, not as a performance, but as truth incarnate. 4. Protecting the flame, ongoing practice. A single vision, no matter how vivid, is not enough. The soul does not bloom in one season. Just as the alchemist returns to the furnace, just as the Hermetic initiate climbs again and again through the planetary spheres, the practitioner of active imagination must return, not out of compulsion, but devotion. Make it a rhythm, not a rule. Perhaps once a week, or on new moons, or in moments of crisis or longing. Let your soul know, I will listen again. And over time, something grows. Your inner world becomes more coherent. Your archetypes become clearer. Your ego becomes humbler. Your decisions become truer. And most importantly, your life begins to feel mythic, not dramatic, but meaningful. You begin to see your struggles as symbolic, your failures as initiations, your longings as maps. You begin to walk in the world not as someone seeking meaning, but as someone bringing it. Living the inner myth. In the end, this is the true goal of active imagination, not to escape reality, but to transfigure it. You are not meant to remain in the inner chamber forever. You are meant to emerge, like the mystic who has seen the divine fire and now walks among others, carrying its warmth. You are meant to become the carrier of your own myth, not the hero others expect, not the archetype you envy, but your myth honest, flawed, radiant, unique. This is what Hermes teaches. Not that the gods are distant, but that they live within. Not that salvation lies in the stars, but that the stars lie in you. Not that wisdom is found in books, but that the book is your own life, if only you read it symbolically. And so, dear traveler of the inner world, may you descend bravely. May you listen humbly. May you speak truthfully. And may you return, carrying the mirror of the soul into a world starving for reflection.